Hello, this is Corbin, addressing the audience directly. How are you doing? Hope you're doing well. So, this video is different than my previous videos, which I think I'm saying every video now, but it's appropriate in this case because this is actually the first script that I wrote for a YouTube video. So it's unrelated to anything else that I've been talking about recently, but this is going to be a very busy month for me. This month and next month are going to be very busy for me, so I'm just taking an old script and I'm making the videos that I planned, finally. So, instead of doing a nuanced analysis of a particular work, this is just going to be my opinions on how to write a particular thing, in this case, assassins. Obviously, I'm not qualified to give storytelling advice on how to write a specific thing, but that's what YouTube is for, people giving their opinions and cat videos. So anyway, I hope you enjoy this, and I hope that you're able to make use of it, perhaps. Enjoy. So an assassin, if they're good at their job, the heroes won't know about them until they appear. So how do you build up an assassin who is scary, but also competent? If your assassin is competent, then the heroes don't know about them. If your assassin is scary, you, at least the viewer, have to know about them. And in order for there to be any impact on your characters, the character also has to know about them. So this is the conundrum. And that's why I'm going to expand the definition of assassin within the context of this video. So, an assassin is someone who is paid to hunt and kill someone. And that's normally going to be your hero. The way that one would want to incorporate assassins into their story varies greatly based upon the genre of that story. So we're going to separate this video out into assassins as they operate in different genres of fiction. So in the typical adventure novels format or typical journey-heavy medieval fantasy story, you don't want a traditional assassin to attack your heroes on the road, because if the assassins are any good at their job, the heroes won't know that they're coming until they're already there, so there's no tension or build-up for the reader or for the audience to know anything about the assassin until they're already there. There's no sense of dread that the heroes feel that they're being hunted by someone. And therefore, you want a kind of villain, a kind of obstacle that is assassin-like, but operates a little bit more like a hunter, right? So the definition of an assassin is there is someone being hired specifically to go out and kill a specific person or a specific group of people. So within the medieval fantasy genre, or within the adventure novel genre, what this looks like, because your heroes are traveling through various dangerous areas, you want a sense of dread because they are hunted by something. So, a perfect example of this, of course, is the ringwraiths in Lord of the Rings. Gandalf knows that there are a group of very terrifying creatures who are specifically going out to hunt the One Ring and kill the one who carries it. Another example of this would be in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, with Mogrim, the head of the Queen's secret police, and we'll get back to secret police later, that works well in another genre. Mogrim and his wolves hunting the Pevensey children is a good way of setting up that there are these group of killers who are specifically hunting the heroes, but they're not normal assassins. They're more like hunters or trackers or wolves. Wolves have this really good imagery as well. The Neverending story has the same thing. The servant of the nothing who hunts Atreyu across his journey. So there's always that sense of tension that the audience knows, even though Atreyu doesn't know, that there's something chasing him, not just the end of the world, not just the nothing itself, but this specific thing that's trying to kill him. And that's a really good sense of dread in the story. In a story where characters are very high profile, where they have a lot of influence within their society, and they're operating in a level that is very important to their country or military, that is, of course, a fantastic situation to throw in assassins, but the assassins themselves are normally not what's interesting in that genre. What's interesting is that the threat of assassination is always hidden behind people who the characters interact with, who are generally very polite and civil and may even pretend to be their allies, right? The hood and the blade are not what's scary to the hero. What's scary to the hero is that these people who are seemingly harmless that they interact with are the ones who could be ordering their death in the next day or the next chapter. A good example of this is in Victoria Schwab's Shades of Magic series, where one of the protagonists, Kell, has the ability to travel to different dimensions, but when he's at home, he's stuck at home because, while he's invaluable in his ability to be a diplomat to other dimensions, he's also a prince of that country, and when he's at home, he has to stay within the palace in order to protect the family line and to protect his brother because he's the most competent bodyguard there is. So this creates a really good sense of tension between his own desires and goals and the practical reality of, well, your brother could be assassinated at any point, so you have to stay here in order to protect the family. This is an important thing to think about when it comes to characters that are of high status, is that there are naturally a lot of good opportunities for character development because of their social status and because of the threat of assassination. In The King of Attolia by Megan Whalen Turner, the point of view character is a bodyguard for an ill-liked and untrusted king. His own court doesn't like him, and even his servants put sand in his food and do other petty things to show how easy it would be to assassinate him if given the reason to do so. So, in order to keep the king in line, in order to keep Aldous in line, the characters constantly prod him throughout the book, and this creates an interesting situation for the bodyguard to decide whether or not he even wants to defend the king, how best to maintain his position without also earning the ire of the court and also he doesn't want to deal with the king himself. So it's a great situation for character development. Of course, when assassins do come for him, it's not as though Attolia needs the help of a bodyguard. I thought that being king meant that I didn't have to kill people myself. The best use of an intense political situation with the constant threat of assassination in a story that I've read is in James Clavell's Shogun. In Shogun, an English sea captain by the name of Blackthorn washes up on the shores of 17th century Japan and quickly rises to a rank of political power within that society. This makes nearly every faction in play mad at him, especially the Spanish and Portuguese, who are at war with the rebellious British and Dutch back at home. As such, any interaction that Blackthorn has with anyone in power always carries with it a constant threat of assassination. Several assassination attempts happen throughout the book, many very early on in the story, and Blackthorn has to navigate these situations very carefully because of that constant threat, and the reader feels it as well. There are also, of course, attacks by ninjas, because this is Japan, so of course you gotta have ninjas. So once again, in this kind of story, the assassins themselves are not what's scary. It's that constant threat that's just kind of in the back of your mind that if I make the wrong political move, my rivals will attempt to assassinate me. When a world is already under the thumb of an evil emperor, an iron-fisted dictatorship, or a government that really doesn't want their citizens to read books, they need a way of removing those citizens who cause trouble for the current regime. You can't have pesky people who have the audacity to pursue their own thoughts and ideas. That would be wrong. As such, you've got to have a secret police. And one of the duties of a secret police is to identify and execute specific individuals who are causing trouble for the regime. In George Orwell's 1984, the ministries of love and truth are actually opposed to assassinating their citizens outright because they don't want any martyrs to inspire the rest of the population to rise up against their government. Anyone that they do target and decide is a threat to the regime, they break their will to resist first, and are certain that these people are seen in public before they kill them, but they still put a bullet in their brain In Ray Bradbury's Fahrenheit 451, if a fireman goes AWOL, he is hunted down by a giant mechanical dog, which is typical Bradbury. If you have this beautiful literary work, which is a carefully crafted critique of censorship and the importance of art and beauty and the perseverance of culture, and then you've got, on the other hand, this giant robot dog that hunts down firemen, and the firemen have to kill them with flamethrowers. It's that perfect mixture of like nerdy science fiction elements mixed in with poignant literary truths. Perfect stuff. And in Brandon Sanderson's Mistborn, of course, you have the Steel Inquisitors, who are these nightmarish monsters with spikes driven through their eye sockets, who can sniff out the magical abilities of others and hunt them down, and they are nigh unkillable, which makes them this perfect blend of an enforcer that is a symbol of the regime, of this is something that you don't want to mess with, but also has the benefits of that shadowy, terrifying, mysterious, assassin-esque element to them, where they can be tasked with hunting down members of the resistance and killing them. So if you're writing a story in a dystopian setting that features assassins in it, you want to determine how prominent those assassins are based upon how much the government needs them, right? So in Aldous Huxley's Brave New World, there is no need for a secret police because the dystopia is implemented in such a way that even if an individual realizes that their government is terrible and their society is terrible, it's almost impossible to convince anyone of that because the society seems so good and so pleasant and so free, which makes it one of the most terrifying dystopias, in my opinion. So that story doesn't need assassins in it at all. Whereas other stories, like 1984, the assassination is a footnote to the way the regime operates. But in stories like Fahrenheit 451 or Mistborn, the assassins are a very important part of that society, or rather the secret police that perform assassinations are very evocative and are a very important part of how that regime operates. Detectives are specialists of their own. They tend to work solo or in small groups, perhaps with a single partner, and their job is to track people down and identify them. So they share a lot of the same attributes as assassins. This makes assassins and detectives excellent adversaries for one another. So if you're telling a detective story, it's a good place to insert assassins as opposition for your heroes. In the Sherlock Holmes short story, The Adventure of the Empty House, Holmes goes up against one of Moriarty's former associates, an assassin who kills quietly at range with an air gun. This is an interesting story because the assassin is not merely a threat to other characters, but also to Holmes himself. The story revolves around this assassin hunting Holmes. So it's an engaging cat-and-mouse game that's not merely a matter of deducting who killed somebody else, who might be a threat at the end of the story. It's instead a story of Holmes evading assassination. It was also Arthur Conan Doyle's sixth favorite Sherlock Holmes story, if that's something that you ever wanted to know. This was his sixth favorite. In Jim Butcher's Dresden Files series, there are so many different assassins that it's difficult to keep track of, and I could talk about it for a very long time. But I wanted to specifically bring up the Gruffs. The Gruffs are amazing characters and a great way of depicting assassins because they are so unassassin-like, they're so straightforward. So in Small Favor, someone hires 3 Gruffs, as in the Billy Goat's Gruff, which are these goat creatures, these goat men who show up at the worst possible time to kill Dresden, whenever Dresden's in the middle of something else, and they just kind of bash through the wall and then speak poetic Middle English to Dresden, and it is great because you don't have to look at the story from their perspective. They're such dramatic characters that when they show up, they make such an impression, and they do so without subtlety, in a way that Dresden has to deal with them in order to get to the rest of the story, but they still fit the role of assassins, right? They're still specifically there to kill Dresden. They just have no subtlety about it. They're there to challenge him and banter with him and fight him, and they're really good obstacles in the way of solving the case. So this works well in detective stories. It could also work well in other elements, in other genres, but you gotta make the assassins have enough personality to not just be gloomy loners. We'll get to that in the next video, where I talk about assassins as characters. But you have to have them have a presence where when they show up, it's not just an interruption to the story, it's a frustrating interruption to the story, but also one that's enjoyable and you look forward to, of, oh, this is the part of the story where the assassins come to kill the hero, and it's a cool showdown without it interrupting the flow of your story. It's part of the story that the villains don't want the hero to succeed in whatever they're doing, whether it be solving the crime or anything else. So they've hired people to take care of them, and this is something that adds to the mystique of the villain. It adds to what the villain is doing without dissipating the tension from the rest of the story. Also in the Dresden Files, in other stories, in Stormfront, and in one of the other stories, in Stormfront, there's a character who kills from a distance using ritual magic. This is a good thing to think about in any sort of story that has fantasy elements, is that an assassin doesn't have to be in the room anymore at all, or even on the same plane of existence, because they can just use magic to kill in various horrific ways, and all they need is the right spell, and maybe the right components, maybe a lock of hair, or a blood sample, or anything of that sort. And you can incorporate that into science fiction stories as well, using advanced technology, because as we know, sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. So it's worth thinking about. If your assassin is very smart and practical, they don't want to be in the room with the person they're killing. They want to be completely untouchable and leave as little evidence as possible of their crime. If you're going for a rule of cool factor with assassins as opposition to the hero, though, you probably want a sort of showdown conclusion, which means that if all of your assassins in your story are being very smart and very practical and killing from a distance and leaving minimal traces, you want them to be competent hand-to-hand combatants as well for a final showdown, and that doesn't always work. You may want to include other characters for that role. One of the interesting things about magic is that a physically unimpressive person can cast spells. It could be a child who's assassinating someone because they don't need any of the physical abilities, any of the abilities that you would think of that are necessary for a traditional assassin. Because there's so much variation in how one should write an assassin dependent upon the genre and the situation, it's difficult to pin down general writing tips of how to build these characters, especially in regards to how they oppose heroes. In my next video, I'm going to go into how to write an assassin as an actual fleshed out character who the audience is supposed to empathize with and engage with on a character level. This video, as you know, is simply about how do heroes decide how to interact with these specialists who are well-trained and difficult to deal with in a way that other villains aren't. As such, it's difficult to give a conclusion to this video because I've given so many wildly different examples dependent upon the genre. That being said, I think a good final note to end on is two characters from Firefly. Jubal Early is not an assassin, but he shares so many assassin traits that it almost fits within the purview of this video. Jubal Early is a perfect example of how to write a character who is a specialist, who is attempting to target a specific member of the heroes, and how to make them engaging and terrifying opposition. He's a professional, but he's disturbed, and has a very distorted way of seeing the world. And because one of the main things that you want to instill in your viewers or readers when it comes to assassins is this sense of dread, this kind of sword of Damocles that is hanging over your protagonists' heads. This character that you care about is being targeted to be specifically killed or captured, in the case of River Tam, by this highly dangerous, highly disturbing character. The way that Jubal Early is written has those characteristics perfectly developed. You see the way that he engages with each member of the crew, except for Jane, and it's almost like a horror story concept. It's almost like, another example of this might be Predator. I don't know why these are science fiction examples, but they happen to be. Is that your characters are being hunted to be killed. Your protagonists are being hunted to be killed. And the person hunting them, or the creature hunting them, is competent and has a mindset that is all about neutralizing or killing the people that they need to in order to achieve their objective. And that's the sort of feeling that you want in your readers to have of, oh, this is not a normal villain that I'm dealing with. This is someone who has a mindset that is not normal, a mindset that is well suited to doing things that normal people wouldn't do in order to make their living or to serve their cause. The operative in Serenity has the same sort of thing going on, except that he's far more of a fleshed out character than Jubal Early. The operative is I think one of the best characters that I've seen written in anything, probably. And that's why I'm going to talk about him more in my next video, Assassins as Characters. So, if you're writing a character who's only meant to be a villain, what you need to focus on is how they interact with your heroes, and also how the audience feels about them. If there's that sense of dread, and there's that sense of there's a real danger to your characters being killed because this character is so good at what they do, and because they are well equipped to do so, depending upon the genre. That's what ties it together, right? The kind of assassin that you're writing depends on what kind of story you're telling. And I think that's a pretty good summary.